Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Small Business Success Talk. I am your host, Christy Smollett. I'm always super excited. If you haven't heard me say that 100 times by now, then you haven't been listening. Super excited that I do these episodes because they really do recharge me a little bit. It gives me a little extra energy to go on about my day when I have an interview. And this is definitely going to be one of those interviews that this particular guest I hadn't met before today. So I don't even know what all to say about her. Her background, though, covers a gamut of things. But before I get to explaining who she is and what she's done, I do want to mention my sponsor partner because I thought about them a lot whenever we went through this interview. The Chamber of St. Matthews is my sponsor partner in this. And we have a program that we do 4 times a year where it's called Inspire. And it's where we invite one of our area regional successful women to come share their story. And that story turns into an experience for that event of the whole room coming together in community and to talk about what they learned from that story, how that story inspired them. And so that woman of success is just sharing her story. I have had the privilege and the honor and the therapy sessions to be one of those speakers for Inspire, sharing my own personal trials and tribulations as a successful business owner in that room. And so my guest today inspired me to even think about that. I'm like, how important it is to share our story. That's why this show exists. I want to be able to listen and hear and share business owners' stories because it's so important for everybody to know. First of all, you're not alone in this journey of business ownership. You're not alone. There is a huge tribe of people out there who are going through the same similar things as you are. They've been there, done that. They got the t-shirt kind of thing. There's a lot of learning lessons. There's a lot of best practices. There's a lot of great things that we talk about on this show. With this guest, it's no different. Sylvia Lovely is definitely lovely. And I was hoping for that before I was like, I really hope that turns into it. And it totally did. I enjoyed our conversation. She is a retired CEO of 30 years. She's also an attorney and a lawyer part-time. She works mostly in storytelling now, but all of the things that she's done before, she's written a book and she's led all these groups and she's worked in the political arena. And just, she's done a lot. And as she'll say right off the bat, she's no spring chicken. As your life progresses, you increase the amount of stories that you could tell. And she's got some great stories that she told. I love the title of her book. It's Dodging Coconuts, How to Survive the Storm and Rebuild Your Life. Love it. And she goes into a little bit of, part of the story that inspired her to even write that book. So without further ado, because I really don't want to take up all the time ahead of time here, I want to introduce you to my new lovely friend, Sylvia Lovely. Well, Sylvia, thank you for being my guest today on the show. I'm very much looking forward to you telling your story. I know the information that you sent me, but I can't wait to get to it. So to give our audience an idea of what your origin story is, tell us the story of Sylvia.
Okay. Well, first of all, look at me. I'm not a spring chicken. Okay. So I have a lot of story, behind me. But the short version, I guess, in bringing you up to date is that I'm a lawyer. In fact, I often introduce myself as a lawyer by training, a CEO by experience, and a media mogul, ... in my dreams. I do radio. I've done, a lot of like op-eds on public radio and such as that. And in current times, I actually have a food show because I own restaurants here in town in Lexington.
Oh.
And so I'm a foodie.
How did I miss that point?
Yeah. I forget. I'm serious, Christy. I have so many different tentacles. Just because I'm out there, I'm old. Anyway, I'm having fun. So I started out born in Kentucky, raised in Ohio, came back, went to law school. Don't know why. My parents were eighth grade education people. And somebody said to me one day, I was working on a master's degree in sociology. And they said, why don't you go to law school? And I'm like, well, why not? I don't know what they do, but I'll do that. So I did. Well, I think it was not a great fit for me. I mean, I'm not kind of lawyerly. I'm much more a bring people together kind of person as opposed to. Anyway, that's part of my story, though, later on. But I took a job as a lobbyist for an organization and became its CEO. And I did that for 30 years. And then for the last 10 years, I've had a consulting business. And that's been exciting, but it's gotten more exciting as I neared the end. So here I am kind of fast forwarding, and I am actually using my law degree in a very part-time kind of context. Okay. I'm helping people who are in recovery restore and get their civil legal needs taken care of. Those are things like expungement, family law issues, starting a legal help center here in town. And that's my part-time life. And I'm having to learn for the first time in my life legal stuff. Okay. And that's kind of interesting because it's like, how do you do a divorce? If you want a divorce, Chrissy, I can get you one. Okay.
Oh, I did my own 20 years ago.
Did you? Okay. All right. You're together. I love it. Well, anyway, the paper, the stack of papers to file for a divorce are like this. And so I get to do that, do expungements. I've done videos for people, legal concepts in plain English. That's pretty helpful, right? I mean, you think about
right, translate all that
law is, and so that's where I was, and so I'm learning, and I'm doing this legal help center, and and I work with the Kentucky Access to Justice Commission in that context. But I often tell people, and I'm joking, okay, I'm joking. That's this. I'm telling you that right up front, but. I tell people I was a CEO for 30 years and therefore I have no marketable skills. And you think about it, the skill sets that work today are like, medicine or, technicians or, anyway, I'm not good at that. I'm more the 30,000 foot kind of person with that, but I'm learning. I'm having to learn. But my passion, Christy, is stories. And I came to that actually early in my career as a CEO. And I would travel the state and I worked with local elected officials, much maligned people in the press. And that's a shame because so many of them are just good, decent people who, in retirement, they want to serve. Obviously, we have problems now. People don't want to do that anymore. But one day a mayor told me, he said, Sylvia, you meet so many interesting people. You should keep notebooks. And this was back in the day when you did index cards, right? You didn't do what we do today with notes and all that stuff. So I told him, I said, look, I have small children. I can't do that. No, he said, just write down a note on an index card and keep it. And someday you can flesh those stories out. And so I did. And I have this huge collection of stories in, just little index cards. And one of these days I do occasionally pick out my favorite ones and all of that. And I wrote a couple of books where I included some of those wonderful little stories, talking to one of the commissioners in the city of Paducah, for instance. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting there and he gets a call and it's a police deal out at Walmart. There's somebody in the parking lot doing something. And, he said, I guess everybody ends up at Walmart, even thieves. And I just love that, It was just such a salt of the earth comment. So I collected all those stories, but I kind of let it lay dormant for a while. And then you mentioned a life change for you. I've heard you talk about that in 2009. Well, I had a magnificently huge life change experience in 2008. And if you recall, and if I'm talking too much, you just interrupt me. Okay.
Well, that's kind of the whole point of this show is to let you talk.
I know, but I like back and forth too. So anyway, but if you recall, in 2008, 2009 was the Great Recession.
Yeah, those gas prices weren't fun, but these gas prices suck donkey balls in comparison. So yeah, I remember those days.
It was big. People were losing houses. People were jumping off buildings. It was really compared almost to a depression. I hope we're not heading in another one of those. But Anyway, a lot of things happened. There was a lot of dynamic. There was anger in the air. People were, the news media, for instance, was in a free fall. I mean, they were not,
Yep.
they weren't selling newspapers. I think, 100 years from now, we won't be here, but looking back, I think we'll see it as having been a huge cataclysmic, life-changing kind of era. And maybe that's what's brought on all the craziness that we seem to have lived with ever since. It seems like the emergencies never end, right? We're just kind of in from one to the other, to the other, to the other.
My mama would call that, if it ain't one damn thing, it's another.
Yeah.
That
And
is
remember,
what's
Mama went through her own sets of trials and tribulations.
Yep.
But I do think it's different today in that we just know too much. And there's just so much bombarding us every minute.
We don't have enough space to process it.
No, we can't filter it.
Before something else is hitting us. Like, I just need a moment.
Yeah,
like over
to
and
absorb
right.
something.
Yeah.
The 24-hour news. I used to love it. And now I'm kind of like, I need to kind of not do that as much.
I am just old enough. I'm a solid Gen X. So I am just old enough to remember the TV stations that would shut off at night with the Star Spangled Banner. And then you'd see the white noise and it'd go,
yeah. Yeah.
And that would be it until the next day.
Today's so different. Today's so different. We have social media. We have, what is a famous book, Bowling Alone? We bowl more often, but we're alone and we don't form those community bonds like we used to.
Yeah. It's hard to just shut that off. Okay. So 2008, something big happened for you.
Something big happened to me in 2008. I lost my beloved job. Lots of intrigue and story behind that is way longer than to get into. And I get a speech on keynote on October 6th. And it was really like I remembered it. And I remembered why I dug myself out of a catastrophic event in my life. And you can ask, well, what happened to you? And I'm still not sure. It's like Hillary Clinton's book, what happened? I'm still trying to figure out what happened. It was some combination of politics. I was in the political sphere. I was touted to run for big offices and stuff like that. So I was a target. It was a legal argument that I couldn't get the media to engage with me in. And so finally I negotiated. I was a beloved person, by the way. I was beloved until I wasn't, by some people that were around me. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that. Lots of people have. They don't talk about it a whole lot.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a big problem, that we don't allow people to talk about those things. But hopefully they can. And hopefully you're helping to open that door for it. But I wrote a book because it was such a disaster, and I had a medical catastrophe that followed quickly thereafter in 2010. This was all 8, 9, and 10. And I'm a victim of, and you're too young to know this, but there was a drug on the market called Fosamax, and it strengthened bones. And if you stayed on it too long, and I had an aggressive doctor, and I tolerated the medicine, some people didn't. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm supposed to take this, I will. Caused my bones to turn porous instead of being bone material. And my left leg completely disembodied from me one night on a Friday night. Emergency room, emergency surgery, and a pulmonary embolism. I was in a hospital, in a wheelchair, all of those things. And I call it my year of forced contemplation. And I wrote a book. And my book is called Dodging Coconuts. I don't know.
Dodging Coconuts.
Dodging Coconuts. Let me tell you about that story. How to survive the storm and rebuild your life. And what Dodging Coconuts came to me because I'm an avid reader of the smallest little piece in a newspaper, just the little trivia stuff, And there was this story of this gentleman when a typhoon hit somewhere in the South Seas or something, and it hit, and coconuts, which normally nourish us, and the swaying and the breeze, and we're sitting there with a margarita and feet up on we're in a Chase lounge, and it's wonderful and it's breezy. Well, when the storms in those parts of the world, they become missiles of destruction. And
shit you don't think about on a normal day.
Don't think about it. And yet they can hit you. And it killed this man. He was the sole breadwinner. And I read this little story about him. So he's my opener in the book. And I just describe the story and how I saw it unfolded. And then in the last half of the book, I dealt with what do you do to recover? So then I published that in 2016 and really forgot about it. I looked on Amazon the other day. It's so funny. I'm gonna tell you, it's $4 now. I'm like, gee whiz, I can't even, I just tell people to, waste $4 on a cup of coffee, right? So I need to order some books or else they'll go out of print, but they're on Amazon. And so what I did is I revived it. I had started teaching writing classes for Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, in addition to my part-time law job and other kinds of things, my restaurant business and such as that, my radio programs. And I started thinking about that because of October 6th. I had to give this keynote. And what they wanted to hear, these women, is they wanted to hear not the shiny success stories. They wanted to hear, how did you live through something that happened to you? And what I did was I wrote this presentation on how my stories really helped me dig out. One, my story, a healing story, I guess I could say, is number one, you cannot do a do-over. Your story is your story, good or bad, it happened. And you have to, but what you have to do is know what to do with that story. Put it in a journal, put it somewhere, write the story and let it live somewhere, because the story teaches us. That's how we gain wisdom. And people like Brene Brown, and I guess more in a popular way, Simone Biles, people who are admitting their vulnerabilities, are the people who are okay, because it's okay. We've all had these things happen that we put in the closet instead of sharing. So I stepped out on a limb because, a lot of my friends said, Sylvia, why are you reminding people of that? They might have forgotten it because, I got to tell you, Christy, I was the person that the IRS agent audited me as a result. IRS audited me as a result of newspaper articles. And at the end, I was in the hospital recovering, and he called me, and he was at the end of the audit, and he was writing me a check for $13,000. And he said, you're getting this refund. He said, tell me something. He said, why didn't you fight back? You're the most unfairly maligned person I ever met. And I said, I don't know. I was exhausted. I just finally left because it was easier that way, because things happen to us. Stars line up.
Right.
Somehow you get crossways with the wrong person. And none of us are perfect. And when you're in the spotlight like that, every little thing you ever did or said comes out. And it was, just.
That's why I can't run for president. There'd be no damn way.
I know. So anyway, so I gave that speech and it went over so well. It was like, you have to acknowledge, I grieved for the loss of my friends and my tribe and my story. And I had to realize I had to lay it to rest. The second principle and the second story is you have to write a new story. And I had stories that went with these things that happened to me in my life. But you have to write a new story. But the third thing you got to know is there's no guarantee, because you write a new story, that that's what's going to happen. We don't know. You can try to control, and you can do a certain amount of controlling. But at the end of the day, resilience is what you have to develop so that you can handle the curves and the twists and the bumps and the grinds. And my final principle is my fun one of all, finding humor in any of this kind of thing.
Right.
And my humor story, I do have a humor story if you want to hear it, but if you want to move on, that's fine too.
No, I totally want to hear that.
We
all like to laugh.
My dad, he was World War II era. Okay.
Okay.
All this kind of stuff. And when that happened, I was in the newspaper a lot. And so I told my brother, who was living with my dad, who's challenged, by the way. And I said, Keith, can you take up the newspaper every single day this summer? Because I don't want my daddy to see the newspaper articles. Well, my brother was very faithful and did exactly that. And so about a year later, I went over to my dad's house, and he was an avid newspaper reader. I mean, he loved his newspaper. That era, they had to have the paper newspapers, right? It was a big, important deal. And I said to Daddy, I said, where are your newspapers? I haven't seen you get a newspaper in a while. Well, he said, you know what? He said, they stopped delivering my newspaper, and I'd call them up and I'd say, where's my newspaper? And they'd say, well, we're delivering it. No, you're not. And he said, I just canceled it. So I'm like, okay, I guess, I kind of got a little bit of revenge on that one. So, and the point is, in almost every story, I know I can think of a few that I can't find any humor in, like loss of a child or something like that. But usually there's a flicker of humor somewhere, something you remember somebody said that will cause you to, it's the salve, I think, that helps us get through. And so I have a number of little tiny things like that that happened that turned out to make me chuckle.
Well, and there's so many things that can be happening to people in their lives. Like a colleague of mine through the National Speaker Association, her name Whitney Austin, and she survived a mass shooting. And so her story is so heavy, and you're sit there and enthralled, but it's just such a heavy story to listen to, let alone know that she went through it. But in the framing of how to tell this story to an audience, some of the feedback that she had gotten is if you can find a moment in there where you laughed at yourself, right before it got so heavy to handle, it for the rest of the energy in the room, for the audience in the room, it's like, okay, there will be a light. I mean, she made it. She's standing on stage telling this story, but while she's telling the story, you don't feel like that. So it's like, how do we find the humor in life to help like lighten the moment enough to be able to carry the burden?
Yeah. And, I think maybe part of that is in remembrance of the person. Say you lose somebody and maybe they said something really funny or and you can lighten the moment, because people like in a story. And one of the things I love to teach people to do is to tell their stories, not only to write their stories. One of my seminar that I do on a regular basis, I've done several of them, is writing the stories of your life. And I get the wonderful little following that I have now. And these people are like my new tribe. I've developed this new tribe, and they love these. They don't think of themselves as writers and storytellers because they go hand in glove. You can write the story, but I tell them to write every day that they can. And some, they kind of slip off the road sometimes. But then to turn one or two of them into a presentation, a story. I love the 5-minute story where you have to just really grip people in 5 minutes. And there's some really great stuff out there. And I want to do like a story slam. I know they've done some in Louisville. And
isn't that like the moth?
Yeah. Oh, I love the moth. I love it. On Saturday, my husband wonders if I'm having an affair. I'll be sitting in the Kroger parking lot listening to the moth and laughing my head off.
Then you probably heard my friend Stephen Michael Carr, because he's like really good on the moth. He's also been on the show. He is in nonprofit world. He's a great storyteller. So
it's a gift. Yeah, it's a gift, but it's also a gift that people can learn. So my new pivot, though, and I'm excited about it, and I'm doing a lot of research that writing your stories actually, and they've done, there's proof out there. There's a couple of things. One, there's proof that it actually improves your outlook on life. Now, there's a caveat. What I believe, Christy, and I do it in the law world, okay, right now. I am teaching non-lawyers. I work with pastors across the country, around the state, to be educated about legal concepts so that 60% of people will go to their minister when they're in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so they can help them with, understanding better the legal concepts. They're not lawyers. We don't need a lawyer to do everything. And that, because there aren't enough to go around, that'll work for free, right? The same thing is true with mental health and mental wellness. Everywhere you go, they're looking for social workers, they're looking for counselors, looking for, I'm not that. I'm a goofy little lawyer. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a psychologist. But I think that what I do helps people and helps them deal with their trauma. So I'm doing some work with people who are mentally, have mental illness. And the other thing I believe, I hope you believe this with me, is that we are all on the spectrum somewhere. I'm there somewhere. I don't know. My brother is diagnosed. He's actually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I'm not, but I'm somewhere there. And
I think that's why it's a spectrum.
It is a spectrum, and we all have that need.
Super
and
tiny.
Maybe, I can teach my classes And that's important. But there are people who need real live counselors who, who have all the gizmos and all the stuff. And I'm not that person, but I can help. I'm as think of it as paraprofessionals or somebody who can,
yeah.
Our friends can help us.
As a business coach, I only do so much. Like I'm working with you on your goals and like I can go a little deeper on certain things. But when we start hitting that like emotional oil well, like that's when you need a therapy session. Like you need talk therapy. We need to get in there and get
real help.
All of that out.
Yeah.
And then we can come back and work on focusing on your strategy and direction and things like that. But I have had a couple of in the beginning of my coaching business, I needed to practice and I needed to, start small. So I'd had some friends from church who were like, yeah, let's have a session. Let's see what this does for my life.
Mm-hmm.
And some were like, this is awesome. And others were like, oh my God, it triggered something.
Yeah.
It triggered something. Right. And it opened the gate, this floodgate. And it was uncomfortable. It was a guy on top of it. So for me to sit in front of this guy who is like the macho man of the entire tribe. And it was like, I asked 4 questions and he was broke. Like I broke him. He was breaking down right in front of me. I was like, okay, we are going to stop what we're doing here. And we're going to shift this over. And so he ended up getting counseling because it was something from his past that got triggered. And he needed to go back and like you've mentioned, tell that story out so that he could work out his feelings about it because it was affecting his current day to day. He did. Okay. So then fast forward, he got through that season. He went back and got therapy. He got the counselor, worked it all out. And within 2 years, he found the love of his life.
Oh, so you helped see
that moment was just like this breaking open of epiphany. A catalyst, right? For all this kind of change that happened. And now he's like living his best life.
He's on the path to recovery. See, you helped do that. And I had a class member of one of my classes who was in that same situation. And I really worried because she was like, would burst into tears because we do a lot of reading to each other. And she was like, what stories should I tell and not tell? And I'm like, I think you need, obviously there's something there in the background that I don't want to deal with, but I don't want you to become broken down that I don't help you find. Because again, I think I triggered something by saying, write these things. So it's a heavy responsibility. And I think I'm aware of that. And I think working with people with actual mental illnesses, like I've worked with people who have attempted suicide, and they want to tell their story because they want to help others, and that's going on out there. But they're also seeing mental health professionals. I just worry that our system, the medical profession, has gotten a little better about that. They have nurse practitioners, and the doctors fought it tooth and nail. But you now have nurse practitioners who take care of a lot of the things that the doctors don't need to. But do some things fall through the cracks? Probably. But I think that it's still a good thing. And we need to move more in that direction because there aren't enough mental health counselors. There aren't enough, social workers and all of those kinds of things. Like they keep talking about adding all those things to the schools, school resource people and all that kind of stuff, which is very good, except where do you find all those people? And I think we've got to maybe it's a part, Christy, of community that we've sort of lost the sense of. When I teach a class, one of the things I form early in the sessions, and I only do things where I can do multiple sessions, and we bond, first of all. We come together, we learn who each other is, and it's people from all walks of life, every age. Unfortunately, it's mostly women. And I'm not sure I know why. I've acquired one man in all the classes I've taught, the writing your stories of your life. Now I'm with my mental wellness classes, I call it. It's a little bit more diverse, but it's just interesting to me. I don't think we have reached men as well as we've reached women, which is a shame.
That lends itself to the classic stereotype of men don't talk as much as women, like they don't communicate the same way. So why would they want to tell their stories? They don't have the words to use. Like it could be anything. I'm like gender stereotyping here, but if
Yeah.
that would be my uncle, like he's not going to tell his story. He doesn't give a shit.
No.
But my
But
aunt
maybe
would
they'll,
totally like for days tell it.
yes. And I don't know. That's an interesting distinction because it's true. And again, I don't know. I don't know enough science to know if there's some kind of biological kind of underpinning to that. I have no idea. I just know that men tend to not open up as much as women, but they're starting to in some cases. And maybe as we work at it, we'll see more of that because I think that is truly an important step to take because they've got setbacks too. And I really want to deal with people who have had those moments in their lives, and everybody's had them. Again, Brene Brown talks about it all the time on a huge stage. And the rest of us needs to filter down, and we all need to do that. And so my hope for the future is what I hope to do is to really turn this into my business and my thing. And I'm down that path, and just needing to kind of tie up some loose ends and just kind of engage in it because I love all aspects of stories. And at my age, one of the stories I love is spiritual. It's about the spirituality of what place inspires you the most. And mine happens to be Lake Superior for some strange reason. My son lived up there. And there's something about the vast lake up there that you look out there and you realize we are just one series of stories on a very short time frame and compared to say the vast expanse of that lake. And so if I'm feeling a need for inspiration, I think of Lake Superior, and just because I've been there so often and it feels so right. I've even walked on the water. Ice. It was iced over one year.
Like, damn, look at you go.
So yeah, I love the inspirational piece of writing, and it was so good because I had a reunion of a bunch of my class members the other day, and they were missing me because they wanted, that imbue them with the spirit to go forward and to explore their stories, the tiniest little things, and how important it is, or how to tell a story so that it grips your listener or your reader, and use it. I have a lot of people who want to publish as a result of learning that they're good writers, and that's okay, but it worries me because what I don't want people to get off on is thinking, oh, I want to publish a book. And I don't. Christy, do you have books? You may have books.
Yep.
Have you written a book?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I would imagine you are a bestseller, but most people aren't.
I would love to be that. That'd be fantastic.
But some people aren't. And I told you what I did with my book. I totally ignored it because if you're self-published, which this one was, then you have to go to Amazon. I don't know if this woman told me that I worked with. You have to go to Amazon and hit the button like 40 times a day to make it look like it has a lot of activity and stuff. And I'm like, I ain't doing that. I'm just not going to do that. Well, if you're not willing to do that in this day and age, then you won't sell that many. Okay. And I think I've sold maybe 500 of these.
I don't know that algorithm works anymore. Like it would need to be from different computers hitting that button.
That may be true. They may have caught on to that, but this was in 2016. And I'm like, this was a cathartic exercise. I'll do it. And now that they're $4, I can order a bunch, right?
Oh, you need to look on the back end of that. In the back end of that should be a lot less because you get an author discount on the printing.
I know. But what worries me is that one should not become a writer because they want to publish. If that becomes what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with it. It's very hard. I liken this to at my restaurants, we have a lot of what I call troubadours, local singers, people who come and perform on Friday and Saturday night. They are so good, Christy. I mean, the talent that exists out there.
Isn't it great?
And these are people who desperately want the world. It's kind of like if you write, you kind of do because you want people to hear you. You want your voice to be heard. There's nothing wrong with that. And so a lot of them, like I think of singers, and I told my husband, maybe it's because I'm in the restaurant business and I like wine. I'm a wino, right? is that it's like a wine bottle and everybody's down here in the big fat part, but to get to that skinny part takes a lot of work. And will they really want to do that? Can they just enjoy the pure joy of writing their story, maybe sharing it with their family? And so I didn't want to discourage my friend because she's a good writer, but I also didn't want her to just see that as the end game of writing. The end game of writing is personal joy. And I love that word joy, by the way, not happiness. We won't always be happy, but we can always find joy, I would hope. And I think when I think that, my test kit is a place like Uvalde. How can you ever, as a community, find joy? I don't know. Maybe someday in the memories of the beautiful children whose stories had to be so abruptly stopped. But that's the only thing. There's a great book, by the way, when good things, wait a minute, that may be the sequel I want to write. When bad things happen to good people. I want to write the sequel, When Good Things Happen to Bad People. Anyway, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And I read that and absorbed it. And he was the father of a 13-year-old who died of a horrific disease at age 13, a suffering disease. And people would say to him things like, oh, well, he's in a better place. And he said, you brought me no comfort at all. But he said, the one thing that I know, in a passage in his book, and he said, I know that I have published 3 million of these books. I know that I have changed lives for the better by having these books and having people read them. And I get letters all the time at how much comfort it brought. But if I could have my son back, I'd trade all of that in a heartbeat. ... But I can't. I can't bring my son back. I can't change my story. And so I'll continue on this path where I will try to do the good that I can while I can to help people get through these tragic moments. And that's why I think a lot of times, particularly in these school shootings, you see people who start foundations or they become suddenly politically active in a field that they never thought they would, because that's the only thing they can do to bring peace in their minds and hearts. And I think that, and maybe that's a tiny bit of joy. It's why I like the distinction. I don't think happiness quite captures it. And then the other thing, Christy, I will mention too, is I would like to see more of this go into business calculations. There's a lot.
So when you say that, what do you mean? Like, is that storytelling or joy, happiness?
There's a lot of research on the use of stories in employee settings where people come together and they get to know each other through stories, even just something that simple, like, hosting a class at a corporate, there's a lot of employee assistance stuff going on out there. There's a lot of stuff being thrown at people. Much of it is not effective. I realize that, and that's being written about a lot. But I do think there's a couple of ways stories can be used in business. One of them is through telling the story of your company. And you know all about that because you do that, right?
Straight up, a marketing strategy is, what is the story?
The story
that we're trying to tell.
And make it be something people can really capture, because people are looking for experiences. They want stories. They don't know that they do. They don't have a conscious level.
But it is the thing they gravitate to.
It is.
Yes.
And then there's the second kind of stories, which is to teach them to appreciate their own stories and to help them with, understanding different and diverse cultures in their setting. Remote, people are working so much more remotely now, which I think, again, it's a double-edged sword. People, that's okay, but I worry about some of these young 30-somethings who are all wanting to work at home. And I'm like, you bump into people in the workplace, and that's good. And it gives you, and if you can learn how to understand those people, just like the people in my class, they come together as a tribe by sharing their stories, finding out, number one, we're all kind of after the same thing at the end of the day. And, understanding each other better, I think is important. So I'd like to see businesses do both kinds of things better. I'm probably gravitate toward working with employee groups to help them understand stories and contribute to the story of their company. And, one of the things I love about stories and teaching people is that every person, no matter what you do for a living, for instance, a lot of people think, well, my job isn't important. Some of the best stories out there are people who they're lucky enough to find the story of their life is right under their nose. It isn't, in some other world. The CEO that retired as a big tech guy went to work. I mean, he was, well known. I can't remember his name, but he drives a school bus, polishes that school bus every week, and picks up the kids and changes lives. And that's a tiny thing. It's a tiny thing. That's his story, though. It's inspiring. And, everybody can find worth in everything they do every day. And I think by learning to write their stories, and you find worth in the little things. When my mother was dying of cancer, it was horrific, as they always are. And I remember taking her, she thought there was still a cure, and we kept trying to tell her there wasn't. She died of cervical cancer. And I took her to the palliative care doctor one day, who wasn't going to cure her. But he sat her up and she, very slowly got up on the examining table. It was about 3 months before she died. And he said, Mrs. Leach, her little head was hung low and she'd already just was gaunt. And he said, Mrs. Leach, tell me what you like to do, and I'll adjust your medications to help you do it. And she raised her little head, just a slow and in a tiny little voice. She said, I like to do little things. And it was so telling, because just a week before, no, it was at Christmas time. Okay, it was at Christmas time. She died shortly thereafter. It was like in November. I had taken her to Walmart, and she would lean up against the cart, and I would walk along beside her with the cart. And at Christmas time, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's like little green and red velvet dresses in Walmart. Yep. I don't know. And she would just feel those little dresses. She would finger those little velvet dresses. And I was like, that is a little thing, but it was so meaningful to her that it was the epitome of the joy of Christmas.
That is so wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's okay. So I would normally, in a normal interview, having a guest on this show, I have a kind of a series of questions, and we've kind of gone through a lot of these things, because your particular conversation here is all about the stories. And so I've not been asking a ton of questions. So say thank you, but this is going to be different for my listeners, because they're kind of used to, oh, she's going to ask this. No, it's wonderful. I love mixing it up.
Yeah.
But what I want to go deeper in is those small moments, like you just described, the multi-sensory of that moment can become the story. Like that is like the impact of the inspiration of the story is all wrapped up into that moment.
Oh, yes. In a tiny moment.
Yeah.
Just a tiny moment.
Because isn't that the stuff that really sticks with us?
Yes.
And
remember those moments. One of the exercises that I do is I ask the students, off the top of your head, tell me 5 moments. It doesn't have to be a big moment, just what comes in your mind of a moment. I learned it because I had to do it in a writing class, and I was like, well, shoot, I don't, what did I, and what came to my mind? I'm a dog lover. Okay. And I remember being in a car with a colleague leaving Lake Cumberland State Resort Park. And we were leaving a meeting and working all the time, traveling everywhere in the air most of the time. And he and I were talking, and I said, I have this dog, and I just can't, the dog, I don't know, I'm just going to have to give it away. And I'm like, no, this dog just isn't a good dog. And all of a sudden we grew very quiet, and we suddenly looked at each other and said, I don't think it's the dog. I think it's us. We just aren't paying any attention to the dog anymore. It's like you got kids, you got all this stuff, and the dog gets the blame. But it was just a moment, and it was like so funny because it's stuck in my head over these years. It was just,
And as we are talking about this, I'm thinking, man, because now I'm putting my, marketing strategy hat on and my culture
Mhm.
strategy of what if we actually paid attention to the stories that are going on within our business? Those moments
Yes,
make
those
a
moments.
difference.
Yes, they do. Oh, I love that. The little moments.
The little
Yeah.
moments make a huge difference. And so
Mhm.
it's a hot word nowadays is empathy. And in your storytelling, empathy is going to come out because that's kind of part of what storytelling helps
It
facilitate.
is. You come together and you
Mhm.
laugh together or you cry together. You have those moments of empathy. You learn about the needs. I can't think of a story. One story I do remember, one moment was one of my colleagues, and he was about my age, and we must have been 40 or something. But we were just laughing and howling because a young staff member had told somebody that he was good looking for an older man. And we just thought that was hilarious. I mean, but it was like the bond that brings you together are those tiniest little moments,
Tiny
and where you
things.
laugh together, you cry together. And when you get kicked out of your tribe, which is so many people today do experience job losses. It's just, I
Mhm.
know, in the restaurant business, and it really is tough to be thrown out of your tribe for whatever reason. And, in caveman and women days, people died when they got thrown out of their tribe. So I'm a big proponent of most people can be saved if we just take the time to understand their story. Not everyone, we know that, but
Yeah,
I do
I'm
think
a big superhero person and I'm like, Wonder Woman can't save everybody. It's
no,
okay.
it's right, but we can save some of them.
Yes.
And there's a huge issue with training and all of that kind of stuff. And I know right now, you don't go anywhere, you don't see hiring signs. Everybody's trying to hire. Nobody can figure out what's going wrong with the world, how crazy it's gotten. And I know once you get someone, and sometimes we're down to just live bodies. How do you work with that? How do you, because some people don't have the skill levels that they need to do the work, and
But skills can be trained,
they
attitude
can.
matters.
Yeah,
And if you get their story out of them, you understand the attitude.
that's right. And
Yes.
think about this, and I'm sure in Louisville this is going on. It's going on here, and I work with people in recovery. But there's restaurants that are specializing in second chance people, and they're among their best employees because they've been there and they know they have to.
Mhm.
And we had a young woman come into the legal help center the other day that was in tears because she couldn't find a job because she has a conviction in her background. I don't know what for. I wasn't the person interviewing her, but if you can get to the root of it and help somebody find that opportunity. And there's some good people doing that. Goodwill is doing amazing work in that regard.
Yep.
Amazing work
Yep.
right there in Louisville. I mean, it's in Lexington, it's happening. And, they're listening to those stories. And I'd like for us to listen to other stories too, not just from recovery from addiction. There are other addictions in the world, and people can learn. And I just know so many 30 somethings who lose their jobs today. And it's like they're almost throwaways. And I think that's wrongheaded on the part of corporate America. But, I don't know, it's just something.
There's better ways to do it if people are willing to learn and do. Like
Mhm.
in my area of expertise is strategy and training and marketing, and I see so much and I continue to train on like what new things may be out there, or but the basics that still work. And it all comes down to, can I work with this person in front of me? Can I show them that I care about them, hold the space that they need to be themselves, and guide them to their better version? And that means if I'm sitting on a committee or I am sitting in front of a client, or I'm sitting with my team member, or even my own family and friends. This is who I am when I show up for them, because I know how important that moment can be.
That's right. Hey, let me ask you a question.
What?
Can I turn the tables on you? Since you're in that business, this is something I'm fascinated with.
Sure.
Generational differences. Now, we all hear these people, oh, these young people, they don't know how to work. They don't know what to do, and then they
Every
come up.
generation has said that about the next.
The next one. And I see these young people now have nose rings, tattoos. I mean, perfectly, okay, I'm going to say it. Reputable people have tattoos. I mean, we see it in our bartender. She's brilliant. She's beautiful. She's vivacious. She has these big tattoos. And I'm like, I'm not, okay.
20 years ago, that shit would not fly. The stuff that we see now would not have been acceptable 20 years
or
ago.
look at the football players. They have long, dreadlocks and stuff like that. Well, what about that statement, that blanket statement that old people say? These young people don't work anymore. They don't want to work anymore, which is the easy way of saying, we can't find employees because nobody wants to work anymore.
Right. You're just frustrated because it takes work to find the right employee.
Yeah.
I mean, the change that has happened so fast, I get it. You're frustrated. People have changed. Tech has changed. Policies change. Everything is changing on a daily basis. You can't keep up, and therefore it's their problem.
Yeah. I like to think it's more that than, just like, oh, no, those young people just
look, I have my own get off my lawn moments all the time. And I rein myself in to go, look, they are them. Good for them. They could fly whatever freak flag they want to fly over there. Cause right now I just need a moment to process. Like, I don't understand a lot of the younger generation stuff. Like I said, solid Gen X. I turn 48 next 2 months.
Okay. I was going to ask you what that age group is.
And so I get it. Like, there's not only the millennials, but then there's the ones after the millennials. And now there's a whole nother one after them. And I'm like, I don't even know. And I don't even want to give it time today. I've got other things to do.
Yeah.
And so this becomes nobody wants to work. I'm like, all of this shit I've got to do. Why can't I find somebody to help me?
Yeah.
I've been very blessed with my team has this kind of shown up when I needed them. Each of them has, and I've got multi-generations. I have the millennial and I have a younger millennial, and we're all 10 years apart on the team. And it's definitely an interesting dynamic. But they're dynamic. And one of my team members, she is in a wheelchair. She has, the disability. And it was really interesting because in the interview process, I worked with an organization that works with individuals to get them hired into real jobs. And I looked at her and they were really concerned, like, is the, disability going to be a problem for you, Christy? And I was like, let me ask you this. Is you being in that chair going to stop you from making me look good in my business? And she said, no. And I'm like, then I don't care if you're in the chair. I know it may sound very tactless, but that's just, I don't care. Yeah. Like, you just tell me what you need to, make, it's like she's had some back surgeries and I was like, that's what flex time is for. Like, you have a lot of number of hours. We work this stuff. This is the part that I think a lot of people aren't willing to do, is be adjustable with your people to get the end result done. And for me, I learned a long time ago, I can't be so worked up about how they get it done, but the fact that they get it done.
Yeah. And, you bring to mind, a lot of people, oh, I long for the good old days. Well, there weren't good old days. We all had our issues. I remember I wrote a piece, an op-ed piece, and it was published in the Dayton Daily News. That's where I was raised. My father fought to get a job with an eighth grade education at National Cash Register. Now, if you're under 40, you don't know
Oh,
what
I
a
do
cash
remember
register
National
is.
Cash. It's
Yeah.
CR.
You
Yeah.
remember the big ornate things that were invented in bars to keep the money safe.
Yeah.
And they have a museum in Dayton where you can see these things. And my dad was a drill press operator. He had some piece of that thing that he put in there. So anyway, great stuff. So I wrote an op-ed piece and it was published about how he fought to get a job and how important that job was to him. Well, I'm feeling real proud of myself, right? And I get a letter, and about 2 weeks after that's published, and it's from a man who's very sarcastic in his attitude. And he says, well, I'm so glad your father was able to get a job. I couldn't get a job if I had begged for one as a Black man. And I'm like, okay.
I'm sorry, I can't make everybody happy with this.
Oh, anyway, all right. Well, forget my piece then. But, it just shows you that the world has changed. And for the most part, there are things that are good. There are things that are not so good. And we're just living through a dynamic now that we can't understand for probably decades. And, I won't be, one of the things, Christy, that I've thought about, I'm not going to do it. I shouldn't even say it on air. I should not say this when I say it. I have thought about doing a podcast. I'm not going to do it. And the title of it would be Turning 70 and Other Surprises. I'm 71. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. We're a youth culture, right?
Okay. So
anyway,
final question for you, Sylvia. Okay. Because we've talked a lot about stories. You've got a lot of great stuff going on. I absolutely love this conversation. But last question. What does success mean to you?
Oh boy, that's a good one for turning 70 and other surprises. Success for me, there's a really great thing about arriving at my age. And I wish that, and I'm not trying to say I'm like this wise woman that other people who are younger are not. That's a little bit of a dangerous thing. But you do learn to laugh. What is the famous book? It's famous, but the line at the end is, what is it? The line at the end is, someday I'll learn how to laugh. And so I laugh a lot. And I think that success is, I'm a very ambitious person. I'll say that. And I'm rambling on this, but I'm a very ambitious to a fault person. Always was. I mean, my parents supported me to get out of, where I was. I became a CEO. I probably missed some management lessons along the way because, you see people who become CEOs. Usually, if you look in their background, they weren't they weren't born in a charity hospital, which I was, and all that kind of stuff. And I don't tell that story to have people say, oh my God, aren't you just amazing? No, I'm not just amazing. I tell people, and they laugh, that probably I shouldn't have been a CEO or a lawyer, because I don't know what they do, all that kind of stuff. I just didn't do that. But I just say, I believe that my parents probably should have prepared me to be a pizza parlor checkout girl. And I would have been perfectly happy. Okay. Because that was my world. That was the world I lived in, of, very near the, poverty line and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't. And as a result of that, success for me has become just this series of stories in my life. I'm like Kushner. If I have a magic wand and could have changed not lost my job, I would have retired on time. I would have had a much larger income. I would have probably had a beach house somewhere, but I wouldn't have had the joy of meeting the people that I've met. So my alternate story has turned out. I have a story about my dad, and I'll end with that one. One day I overheard my father in his late 80s telling my younger son, who was graduated from college and was experiencing that first angst of having lost something. Maybe it was an internship or something. And my dad suddenly looked at him and he said, here's a man with an 8th grade education, had to leave school to take care of his family when his father died, and told me that they couldn't go to doctors. They couldn't afford doctors. And my dad said, David, things never work out. And I'm like, my dad was an optimist. What in the world did he mean by that? And then I thought about his life story. He enlisted at age 17, lied about his age, went to Okinawa on the bottom of a ship, but he saw the world. He saw it as seeing the world. And then he married and had my brother in Ohio, left, came back, tried to farm because that's what he really wanted to do in Kentucky. Couldn't do it, couldn't make it. I was the straw that broke the camel's back. I was born in Frenchburg in a charity hospital. There were these charity hospitals that had been established by the Presbyterians. One of these days I need to research that. And he went to get me the morning after I was born. It was like a huge snowstorm. Had to put rags on his tires to get there. And the nurse said, "You're not taking that baby home in this weather." And he said, "I ain't got no insurance and I ain't got no money. I'm taking him home." And so we went to Ohio. He moved to Ohio. He worked as a drill press operator, which had to be a mind numbing job, but he did it. And he was happy. He was a happy person because he was able to support his family and move us into the middle class. I got to go to college. I got to go to law school. I mean, who in my world ever got to do that? So though I'm ambitious, I want my company, my storytelling business, and there's a little tiny part of me that's like, I want to be really successful. I want 1 million people to do this. I think I've reached the point in life where I can be happy with the journey. Isn't that what's important, is to enjoy the journey? Because when you reach my age, you realize that journey, I mean, I'm fascinated when stories come out in the newspaper about people in their 80s doing stuff. And I'm like, how did they do that? I want to know about that. What did they take? So anyway, long answer to your question.
Well, Sylvia, I appreciate your time today on this show. I have loved every story that you've shared. It's been a great conversation. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Christy. I hope to see you sometime.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Did I not say she was lovely? And there was a lot of stories. I really enjoyed this conversation. And like I told her during that conversation, typically I'll ask like some basic questions that I ask of a lot of my guests. Give me your backstory. What do you love most about it? Your biggest challenge, and any good stories. Like sometimes getting those good stories out of people is a little hard, but Sylvia is all about those stories. And I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. There's some things that really, that I loved how she went through. You cannot do a do-over in your life. You get one of these. What are you doing with it? So go through and tell your stories, and you can see this progression of stuff in your life that you've gone through, and what did you get out of it? What came from it? Like, what is the lesson of the story? And if all of that in the past that you didn't like, write a new one, write what your story could become in the future, knowing that there's no guarantee. Like the story that you may write for your future might be fantasy or fiction, but hey, it's going to be fun to write it. Enjoy writing that new story of your life. And then of course, find the humor. Y'all, we need to lighten up around here, just in the world in general. The only real great way to get yourself to a point of being able to lighten up. I have a thing that I did. My coach told me I needed to do it. And so he gave me a template, and I adjusted the template for my own self. An energy audit. So sometimes we're not in the mood. Like our brains, Sylvia and I talked about just being in information overload. There's too much to process all at once. And how do we do that? Well, for me, I need to get to a point of stillness. So getting there is like, what drains me? I can list off 50 things pretty quickly. And then what recharges you? Well, because I was so drained, I couldn't come up with what recharged me. I was like, but you know what creates some peace in my life? And that's the point. I was like, oh, that's the centering point. All of these things that create peace for me is part of my energy audit. It's the thing that I added extra, because then from the peaceful setting, how do I recharge from there? And humor, having those points of humor gets me to a still point. It helps. Like I said, off the top of my head, I thought was actually pretty good. Pretty good. I wrote it down for my own future use. Lighten the moment to carry the burden. Lighten the moment to carry the load, basically. And if you can just find some humor in the moment of anything, just to be able to shift the chemicals, like mix up the chemicals in your brain to something more happier, like the dopamine, but it's through humor, not an outside substance. Using those moments to find that humor. I just love that. And I love that we can laugh about, all of the things ourselves mostly. I am part of the chamber tribe, and our chamber culture is that we take what we do seriously. We're straight up professionals, but we don't take ourselves seriously at all. And that is part of my culture and my business. And we love to have fun. We love to obviously theme things around here, but we take what we do very seriously. Excellence is a big deal. Success is excellence. It's creativity. It's, we know what that looks like for us. Okay. Anyway, those are some things that I got out of my conversation with Sylvia. She is definitely a spitfire. I absolutely adored it. I am looking forward to meeting her again. So keeping in touch with her. You have the same opportunity. So we'll include the information on how to reach out to Sylvia, connect with her, follow her, be in her tribe. You definitely want to follow somebody like that. So you can also learn how to tell your own story. So keep up with her. She can help you with that. And in the meantime, hit the like and subscribe and the little bell buttons. Do all the bells and whistles so that you can get notified when a new episode hits. And also just reach out if you have a comment or a question, or you're like, this person's story really needs to be heard. Please send me that information. I would love to get to know more people and tell their stories as well. So reach out. Let's connect. Follow us. All of that stuff. Appreciate your time again, as always, that you are willing to be part of the tribe for Small Business Success Talk. I have been your host, Christy Smallwood, and I look forward to sharing another episode with you soon. Thanks, everybody.